Introduction to Frankenstein, a modern classic.
Welcome to the haunting world of Frankenstein, a timeless masterpiece that has captivated readers for generations. Mary Shelley's novel, first published in 1818, transcends its era to remain a powerful exploration of human ambition, scientific discovery, and the monstrous consequences of playing God. In this tale, Shelley delves deep into the psyche, peeling back layers of fear, guilt, and obsession, inviting us to question the very nature of creation and the ethical limits of scientific exploration. In the heart of this chilling narrative lies Victor Frankenstein, a young scientist whose quest for knowledge spirals into a nightmarish descent. Victor's creation, often misnamed as Frankenstein, is a patchwork of human remains brought to life through unholy means. This creature, endowed with superhuman strength and profound loneliness, becomes a symbol of humanity's darkest impulses and the unanticipated horrors of unchecked ambition. Originally set against the backdrop of the early 19th century, Shelley's story is as much about the world of her time, brimming with scientific curiosity and revolutionary ideas, as it is about the timeless themes of isolation, identity, and the pursuit of greatness. As Victor's tale unfolds through letters and personal reflections, the reader is drawn into a web of moral complexity and emotional turmoil, where the lines between man and monster blur. The novel's enduring relevance is evident in its persistent influence on literature, film, and popular culture. The creature, with his grotesque form and tragic existence, embodies the fears and hopes of a society grappling with rapid technological advancements and ethical dilemmas. Shelley's work prompts us to consider the cost of progress and the responsibilities that come with wielding such transformative power. Frankenstein is not merely a horror story, it is a profound meditation on creation and destruction, love and abandonment, and the perpetual quest for identity in a world that often feels indifferent. As you turn these pages, prepare to confront the shadows of human nature and the haunting echoes of a tale that speaks as urgently today as it did over 2 centuries ago. Dive into this Gothic classic and let Stephen King's stylistic interpretation of Shelley's evocative prose guide you through the labyrinth of Victor Frankenstein's tortured soul and the relentless pursuit of his own undoing. Whether you are a first-time listener or revisiting this harrowing saga, Frankenstein promises a journey into the depths of human ambition and the monstrous consequences that follow. In this series, Frankenstein is being reimagined in the style of Stephen King, the undisputed master of modern horror, who has been a defining voice in American literature for over 4 decades. Born in Portland, Maine in 1947, King has a knack for transforming everyday situations into the stuff of nightmares. With over 60 novels, 200 short stories, and countless adaptations in film and television, his prolific career has shaped the genre, making him a household name synonymous with suspense and the supernatural. King's storytelling prowess lies in his ability to create deeply relatable characters and set them against the backdrop of extraordinary, often terrifying events. His works, ranging from Carrie and The Shining to It and the Dark Tower series, are not just tales of horror, but explorations of the human condition, filled with rich detail and emotional depth. His narratives often weave ordinary life with the sinister and the surreal, reflecting his keen insight into the fears and desires that haunt us all. A recipient of numerous awards, including the Bram Stoker Award and the National Medal of Arts, King's influence extends beyond literature into pop culture, where his themes of good versus evil, the power of memory, and the complexities of morality resonate deeply. His unique ability to ground the supernatural in the familiar makes his stories both compelling and unnerving, inviting readers to question the thin veil between reality and the unknown. Whether he's conjuring the horrors lurking beneath the surface of small-town America or delving into the psychological depths of his characters, Stephen King remains a masterful storyteller whose work continues to captivate and terrify audiences around the world. Please take a moment to like this video or subscribe to the Classic Books Reimagined channel. Your support helps others find this content, helps build our community. Thank you, and enjoy Frankenstein Reimagined.
Preface. Dr. Darwin and the physiologists of Germany might tell you it's not impossible. Hell, they might even say it could happen tomorrow. But don't mistake my lack of faith for credence in the impossible. No, I've simply taken this curious notion and spun it into a yarn. What follows isn't just another ghost story or enchanted fantasy. It's something more grounded, more deeply rooted in the soil of human emotion and frailty. Let's set the scene. Picture a cold, rainy summer in Geneva. Yeah, I know, sounds like a cruel joke, right? But that was 1816 for you. Every evening, we'd gather around a crackling fire, the kind that hissed and popped as if it had secrets to tell. The room smelled of damp wood and old books, the kind of scent that clings to your clothes and settles in your bones. There was a particular evening, the rain hammering against the windows like 1,000 tiny fists, when we found ourselves with a book of German ghost stories, tales of specters and strange happenings that made the shadows in the corners seem a little darker. We read them aloud, taking turns, our voices hushed and eager, and somewhere in those hours of shared chills and laughter, the idea was born. Why don't we write our own stories? It was Byron, of course. He always had a flair for the dramatic, his eyes gleaming with mischief as he tossed the suggestion into the room. Percy, ever the competitor, jumped at the challenge, and then there was me, quietly listening, my mind already wandering down dark and twisted paths. Byron and Percy took off for the Alps the next day, chasing sunshine and grandeur. I stayed behind, Geneva's rain my only companion. But it was in those solitary moments, with the fire whispering and the rain drumming a steady beat, that the first lines of my tale began to take shape. The core of this story was sparked by a casual conversation, the kind that drifts like smoke and leaves you wondering where it all started. A mix of amusement and a desire to stretch the mind's untested muscles fueled the initial words. As I wrote, deeper motivations crept in, questions of morality, the warmth of domestic affection, the pursuit of virtue. But don't be fooled into thinking every thought belongs to me. The hero of this tale has his own convictions, separate from mine, and I'm merely the conduit. The story starts in the majestic landscapes of Geneva, a place that haunts me still, the kind of beauty that lingers like a melody you can't quite shake. It's here, among the rolling hills and serene lakes, that the impossible becomes just a touch more plausible. It's where our tale finds its heart, pulsing with the rhythm of old secrets and new terrors. So, as the fire burns low and the shadows lengthen, settle in and listen. This story is born from rain and whispers, from the playful urge to imitate the unknown. A story that stands alone, the solitary fruit of a summer's idle dream. And as you turn the pages, remember, the ordinary world can hold extraordinary horrors, and the line between the two is thinner than you might think. Signed, Marlowe, September 2024. Email to Mrs. Saville, England, from rwalton@arcticdreams.com. Subject: Icy Beginnings and Fiery Ambitions. December 11th, 2023. Hey Marge, guess what? No disaster so far. I know you were worried sick about this crazy idea of mine, but I made it to St. Petersburg in one piece. And yes, before you start, I'm warm and fed and my Wi-Fi works, mostly. So there's that. Walking through the streets here, you can feel the northern wind slap you in the face. It's like getting a high five from an iceberg. It's cold as hell, but I love it. It makes me feel alive, nerves on edge and mind sharp. Do you know what I mean? That rush you get when you know you're on the brink of something big. This wind has traveled from where I'm headed, a taste of the frozen dreams I'm chasing. I know you think the North Pole is just ice and penguins. Well, not penguins, but you get it. But to me, it's a land of endless possibilities. Imagine the sun just skirting the horizon, a perpetual twilight. I swear, it feels like it's calling me. The plan is to find a passage near the pole, something that'll change how we think about travel and maybe even reveal the secrets of the magnetic fields. I know it sounds nuts, but these thoughts fill me with a kind of fiery excitement. It's the kind of dream that kept me up at night when we were kids, remember? All those books from Uncle Thomas's dusty library filled with tales of adventure and discovery. I'd lose myself in them for hours. It's funny how those dreams faded when I first got my hands on the works of Homer and Shakespeare. For a while, I thought I could be a poet, lost in my own paradise of words. But let's be honest, my poetry was crap, and you know it. Still, that disappointment led me here, back to my first love, exploration. 6 years ago, I decided to make this dream a reality. I toughened up, joined the whaling ships, endured the cold, the hunger, the sleepless nights. Twice, I even signed on as an undermate on a Greenland whaler, working my ass off and learning everything I could. So here I am, on the cusp of something incredible. I could have lived a cushy life, but I wanted more. Glory, not comfort. I just wish someone would tell me I'm not completely insane. My confidence wavers sometimes, especially when I think about the dangers ahead. This journey is going to demand everything I've got, not just to keep my own spirits up, but to lift those around me. Russia is weirdly perfect for this kind of travel. The sledges glide over the snow like magic carpets, and if you bundle up in furs, it's actually kind of cozy. Way better than an English stagecoach, I tell you. I'm heading to Archangel soon to hire a ship and a crew of whale fishermen. I'll be ready to sail by June. When will I be back? That's a tough one. If I succeed, it could be years. If I fail, well, you might see me sooner than you'd like. Or never. Take care of yourself, Marge. Heaven knows I'll need all the blessings I can get. And if you ever doubt my gratitude for your love and support, just remember this crazy brother of yours who's trying to change the world. Your affectionate and slightly mad brother, R. Walton. P.S. Ever listen to The Weeknd's new album? Something about the melancholy vibe just fits with the icy landscape here. Email to Mrs. Saville, England, from rowalton@arcticdreams.com. Subject: Frozen Time and Fiery Ambitions. March 28, 2023. Hey Marge, time crawls here in Archangel. Every day feels like I'm stuck in a snow globe, surrounded by frost and snow. But hey, step 2 of the grand plan is in motion. I've got a vessel and I'm rounding up sailors. They seem dependable and brave, just the kind of people you want by your side when you're heading into the unknown. But here's the thing, Marge. I'm lonely. Sure, I'm surrounded by people, but I have no real friends here, no one to share the highs and lows with. It's all well and good to pour my thoughts into these emails, but it's not the same as having someone who gets it, you know? Someone whose eyes light up with the same fire as mine. You might call me a romantic fool, but I miss having a friend. I need someone who's got both brains and guts, someone who can keep me grounded and inspired. Growing up, I ran wild and only had Uncle Thomas's books for company. I was a dreamer with no one to tell me when my dreams were getting out of hand. Now I'm 28 and feel like a kid half the time. My ideas are grand, but they lack a certain polish. I need a friend who wouldn't think I'm crazy and would help me focus, but enough whining. I'm not going to find a friend out on the ocean or here among the merchants and sailors, though, to be fair, some of these rough characters have hearts of gold. Take my lieutenant, for example. He's English, brave, and ambitious. I met him on a whaling ship and convinced him to join me here. He's got a thirst for glory, or maybe just for getting ahead in life. He's a good man, if a bit rough around the edges. Then there's the ship's master. He's a gentle soul, respected by his crew for his kindness and integrity. His story is pretty romantic, actually. Years ago, he fell in love with a young Russian woman. They were set to marry, but she confessed she loved another man. Instead of forcing her into marriage, he gave her lover his farm and money and convinced her father to let them wed. Then he left, only returning once she was happily married. Noble, right? But he's quiet, almost to the point of seeming ignorant, which makes his actions all the more impressive. I know I'm rambling, but I want you to understand where I'm at. Despite my complaints, I'm resolute. This journey is my destiny and I'm committed to it. The winter's been brutal, but spring is early this year, so I might set sail sooner than planned. I'm careful, Marge, you know that. I won't do anything reckless. As the departure date looms closer, I'm a bundle of nerves and excitement. It's impossible to describe the mix of fear and thrill I feel. I'm heading into uncharted territories, places no one's seen before, but don't worry, I won't be like the ancient mariner, cursing myself with some albatross. I've always loved the mystery of the ocean, something that Coleridge's poem ignited in me. There's a part of me that's practical, methodical even, but there's also a part that's drawn to the unknown, to the marvelous. I keep wondering if I'll ever see you again after this. Will I return from the ends of the earth, having circled the globe? It's a tantalizing thought, but I can't dwell on the possibility of failure. Keep writing to me. Your letters are my lifeline. I love you, Marge, and if you never hear from me again, remember me with affection. Your affectionate brother, Robert Walton. P.S. Ever hear Billie Eilish's new track? There's something haunting about it that matches the icy silence here. Email to Mrs. Saville, England, from rwalton@arcticdreams.com. Subject Safe and Sound, July 7th, 2023. Hey Marge, just a quick update to let you know I'm safe and making good progress. This email is hitching a ride on a merchant ship heading back to England. Lucky for it, since I might not see home for years. But don't worry, I'm in high spirits. The crew is solid, brave souls with nerves of steel. The sheets of ice floating past don't scare them, even though they're a constant reminder of the dangers ahead. We're way up north now, and it's summer here. It's not exactly beach weather, but the southern gales bring a surprising warmth. No major incidents so far, just a few rough patches and a small leak, nothing worth writing home about. I'll be happy if that's the worst we face. Don't worry about me, Marge. I'm being careful. I've got a cool head, and I'm determined to succeed. I've come this far navigating the pathless seas with the stars as my guide. What's to stop me now? The will of man is a powerful thing. I can't help but pour my heart out to you like this, but I need to wrap it up. Heaven bless you, dear sister. Your loving brother, R. Walton. Email to Mrs. Saville, England, from rwalton@arcticdreams.com. Subject, The Unexpected Guest, August 5th, 2023. Hey Marge, I have to tell you about something so bizarre it feels like it's ripped straight out of a nightmare. This probably won't reach you before I do, but I need to write it down. Last Monday, we were nearly trapped by ice. It closed in on the ship, leaving barely any room to float. The fog was thick, adding to the danger. We had no choice but to wait it out. Around 2 in the afternoon, the mist lifted, revealing endless plains of ice. It was eerie. Some of the crew groaned, and I started feeling anxious. Then we saw it, a sledge pulled by dogs with a giant of a man guiding it. We watched through our telescopes as he vanished into the ice. This sight filled us with wonder. We thought we were hundreds of miles from any land, but this sight suggested otherwise. We couldn't follow him, trapped as we were by the ice. A couple of hours later, we heard the ice breaking and the ship was free. We stayed put until morning, avoiding the floating ice masses in the dark. When daylight came, the crew was gathered on one side, talking to someone in the sea. It was another sledge, like the one we saw, drifting towards us on a chunk of ice. Only one dog survived, and inside was a man, barely clinging to life. As I approached, the stranger spoke in English with a foreign accent, asking where we were headed. I was shocked by his calmness, considering his dire situation. I told him we were on a voyage of discovery to the North Pole. Satisfied, he agreed to come aboard. Margaret, you should have seen him. He was nearly frozen, emaciated from suffering. We tried to carry him to the cabin, but he fainted as soon as he left the fresh air. We revived him with brandy and blankets, placing him near the stove. It took 2 days for him to speak, and I feared he might have lost his mind. But slowly he recovered, and his expressions of wildness mixed with moments of benevolence fascinated the crew. When he finally spoke, he told us he was pursuing someone who fled from him. This stranger has a darkness about him, a weight of unimaginable grief. He is deeply melancholic, sometimes gnashing his teeth in silent rage. He's become an enigma, drawing the crew's curiosity, though I keep them at bay to let him rest. This stranger, despite his suffering, is incredibly gentle and wise. His words, though chosen with care, flow with an eloquence that captivates. He's recovering, spending time on deck, watching for the sledge we saw. He's involved in my plans, discussing them with a keen interest that encourages me to speak freely. Yesterday, he told me, you seek knowledge and wisdom as I once did. I hope it doesn't become a serpent to sting you as it did for me. He promised to share his story, a tale of unimaginable sorrow and loss. He's asked for time to gather his strength, and I've agreed. I'll record his story, hoping it offers insights to avoid his fate. I feel a deep connection to this man, his suffering moving me to compassion. He might have been a noble soul in better times, now a wreck of his former self, but there's an undeniable beauty in his resilience. Marge, this man is a mystery wrapped in sorrow. I'll keep you updated as his story unfolds. Take care and keep writing. Your letters are my lifeline out here. Your affectionate brother, Robert Walton. August 13th, 2023. Hey Marge, I can't help but share how my feelings for our mysterious guest have deepened each day. He's this incredible mix of wisdom and suffering that pulls at my heartstrings. Seeing such a noble soul destroyed by misery is gut-wrenching. He speaks with such eloquence, every word carefully chosen, yet flowing effortlessly. He's recovering well now, spending a lot of time on deck, always watching for that sledge. Despite his unhappiness, he's genuinely interested in my plans. We've had long conversations where I've laid out everything about my voyage. His enthusiasm matches mine, and I've found myself opening up completely, sharing my burning desire to succeed. even if it means sacrificing everything. As I poured my heart out, I noticed a dark shadow pass over his face. He tried to hold back his emotions, but I saw the tears and heard the groan. Then he spoke, his voice broken. "Unhappy man, do you share my madness? Have you also drunk from this intoxicating cup? Let me tell you my story, and you'll want to throw it away." His words stirred my curiosity, but the grief that overtook him was overwhelming. It took hours of quiet, gentle conversation to calm him down. Once he had control over his emotions, he seemed ashamed of his earlier outburst. We returned to talking about me, my past, my longing for a true friend, someone who could understand and share my dreams. "I agree with you," he said. "We are unfinished creatures, only half made, without someone wiser, better, dearer, to perfect our flawed natures. I had such a friend once, the most noble of humans. You still have hope and the world ahead of you. I have lost everything and cannot start anew." His words carried a profound, settled grief that touched me deeply. He retreated to his cabin, leaving me with a heavy heart. Even in his broken state, he is moved by the beauty of nature, the starry sky, the sea, everything about these extraordinary regions. It's as if he lives a double life, one filled with misery and disappointment, the other soaring like a celestial spirit, untouched by grief. You might think I'm being overly enthusiastic, but if you saw him, you'd understand. He's not like anyone I've ever met. He has this incredible ability to see into the heart of things, to judge with clarity and precision. His voice, with its varied tones, is like music that touches the soul. Take care, Marge. Keep writing. Your letters are my anchor out here. Your affectionate brother, Robert Walton. August 19th, 2023. Hey Marge, yesterday our mysterious guest finally opened up to me. He said, "Captain Walton, you can see I've suffered more than most. I once thought these memories should die with me, but you've convinced me otherwise. You seek knowledge and wisdom, just like I did. I hope your quest doesn't turn into a curse as mine did. I don't know if my story will help you, but since you're on the same path, maybe you can learn from my mistakes. What I'm about to tell you might seem unbelievable, especially in these wild, mysterious regions where anything feels possible." You can imagine how eager I was to hear his story. I wanted to help him, but I also couldn't wait to satisfy my curiosity. "Thank you," I told him, "for sharing this with me. I want to understand and help if I can." He looked at me, his eyes full of sorrow. "Your sympathy is appreciated, but it won't change my fate. I'm waiting for one final event, and then I'll find peace. Listen to my history, and you'll see how unchangeable my destiny is." He promised to start his tale the next day when I had time. I was deeply grateful and resolved to record his words every night, as accurately as possible. This manuscript will surely bring you great pleasure, Marg. Hearing his story in his own voice, seeing his expressive eyes and animated gestures, it's something extraordinary. His tale is bound to be strange and harrowing, a storm that wrecked a noble vessel on its course. Take care, Marge. Your letters mean the world to me out here. Your affectionate brother, Robert Walton. Chapter 1. I was born in Geneva, a city caught between ancient elegance and modern chic. My family is one of the most respected in the city. Think old money, influential, the type to have dinner parties attended by the who's who of Europe. My father was a man of unassailable integrity and tireless devotion to public service. His life was a litany of commitments and duties, a whirlwind of meetings and decisions, always placing the needs of the Republic above his own. It wasn't until the twilight of his life that he met my mother and started a family. The story of their union is worth telling because it says so much about the man he was. One of his closest friends, Beaufort, had been a successful merchant, but life's cruel twists had reduced him to a state of desperate poverty. Proud and unyielding, Beaufort couldn't bear the shame of his fall from grace in a city where he was once celebrated. After settling his debts honorably, he vanished with his daughter, retreating to the obscure corners of Lucerne. My father, a man who valued loyalty above all, was heartbroken by Beaufort's self-imposed exile. He set out to find him, a mission that took nearly a year. When he finally located Beaufort in a dingy apartment near the Rios River, he found a man broken by misfortune. Beaufort's meager savings were dwindling fast, and his health had deteriorated to the point where he was bedridden. His daughter, Caroline, was a beacon of strength amid the gloom. She worked tirelessly to make ends meet, doing any work she could find. She was a fighter, her spirit unbroken by adversity. But eventually, even her iron will couldn't keep her father from succumbing to his illness. Caroline was left alone, an orphan with nothing but her determination. It was in this moment of utter despair that my father appeared like a knight from an old tale. He took Caroline under his wing, bringing her to Geneva and placing her in the care of a relative. 2 years later, they were married. My parents' love was forged in the fires of hardship, and despite their age difference, their bond was unbreakable. My father cherished her, seeing in her resilience a strength he deeply admired. They traveled extensively, seeking solace and healing in the landscapes of Italy, Germany, and France. I was born in Naples, and from my earliest memories, my parents' love and devotion were as constant as the tides. I was their treasure, their joy, and their hope for the future. My mother, driven by memories of her own suffering, became a guardian angel to those in need. During a trip to Lake Como, she discovered a destitute family living in abject poverty. Among them was a child of extraordinary beauty, Elizabeth. Her golden hair and bright blue eyes marked her as different from the rest. My mother learned that Elizabeth was the orphaned daughter of a Milanese nobleman, left in the care of these kind but poor people. When my father returned from Milan, he found Elizabeth playing with me in the hall of our villa. My mother had persuaded her guardians to let her take the child under her wing, and Elizabeth became a cherished member of our family. She was more than a sister to me. She was my companion, my confidant, and my pride. From the moment she arrived, Elizabeth and I shared an unbreakable bond. My mother had promised me a gift, and Elizabeth was that gift, a sister, a friend, and a kindred spirit. We called each other cousins, but in truth, she was my more than sister, a part of me in every way that mattered. Chapter 2. Elizabeth and I, only a year apart, shared our childhood in the modern-day shadow of the Swiss Alps, a place where the digital world meets ancient beauty. Our friendship was the harmony to the eclectic soundtrack of our lives, the pop ballads mingling with the timeless echoes of the mountains. She was the calm to my storm, while she immersed herself in poetry, reveling in the works that streamed from her e-reader. I was all about the how and the why, a tech-savvy kid with a Google Scholar subscription and a knack for taking apart gadgets just to see their innards. Elizabeth found joy in the seasons, the snowy silence of our winters and the vibrant chaos of our summers. I, on the other hand, was captivated by the mechanics of the natural world. My room, a mini-lab, scattered with textbooks on physics and open tabs on quantum theories. The world was a series of codes I was determined to crack, from the patterns of the stars to the peculiarities of climate change. When my younger brother arrived, a surprise 7 years after me, my parents decided to anchor our nomadic lifestyle. We settled into a spacious home in Geneva, with weekends and summers at our lakeside retreat in Belle-Rive. While my parents cherished privacy, I found solace in a few deep friendships rather than the broad social networks of my peers. Among them was Henry Clerval, a boy with a penchant for the dramatic. Henry was all about creating epic YouTube content, staging elaborate reenactments of medieval battles, or diving into the latest fantasy role-playing game. My childhood was an idyllic bubble, punctuated by the gentle guidance of my parents. Their philosophy was simple: nurture and kindness over strict rules. This foundation made me deeply aware of how fortunate I was, a feeling that grew each time I compared our open, supportive home environment with the more restrictive ones some of my friends endured. Despite my sometimes fiery temperament, my energy wasn't wasted on teenage rebellion, but channeled into my insatiable curiosity about everything from AI to biotechnology. Unlike my peers, who were preoccupied with the latest social media trends, I was diving into the mysteries of the cosmos and the intricacies of the human genome, always questioning, always searching. Henry, with his love for history and heroism, seemed to live in another era, or perhaps he was just better at integrating the past with the present, seeing role models in ancient knights and modern-day leaders alike. Elizabeth, ever the peacemaker, brought a touch of grace to our trio. Her presence was like a soft light in the fog, guiding us back when Henry's ambitions pushed him toward reckless adventures or when my experiments led down risky paths. Reflecting on these days, I realize they were the prologue to my later pursuits. The seeds of my destiny were sown in the soil of those early carefree days. It was during an unexpected trip to Tonon, forced indoors by a storm, that I stumbled upon a dusty old book in the corner of the inn's library, a forgotten volume by Cornelius Agrippa. My initial disinterest was quickly replaced by a burning enthusiasm as I delved into Agrippa's world, a realm where the mystical met the scientific. Excited, I shared my discovery with my father, expecting encouragement. Instead, his dismissal of Agrippa as sad trash only fueled my defiance and drove me deeper into the old scientist's theories. Ignoring my father's warnings, I sought out more of Agrippa's works, along with those of Paracelsus and Albertus Magnus. Their ideas, filled with alchemical symbols and promises of transcending nature's limits, were intoxicating to my young mind. My father's indifference, perhaps due to his lack of scientific curiosity, seemed a challenge to prove him wrong. This defiance shaped my path more than any supportive word could have. My fascination with the forbidden, with the edges of science where danger and potential lurked, grew into an obsession that led me away from the safe harbors of conventional study and into turbulent waters. One evening, a violent storm broke over Lake Geneva, a display of nature's raw power that enthralled me. As lightning split the sky, I watched, mesmerized, as a bolt struck a venerable oak near our home, reducing it to splinters. This event, explained later by a visiting scientist, introduced me to the wonders of electricity and galvanism, sparking a shift from mystical speculation to empirical science. Yet this shift was not without loss. The more I learned of real, measurable phenomena, the more the magical world of my childhood reading seemed a quaint relic. Disillusioned, I turned away from the myths of alchemy to embrace the solid ground of physics and mathematics. In this transition, I saw the dual nature of knowledge, a gift that opens infinite doors, but also a burden, forever altering one's perspective on the world. As I moved forward, the innocent delights of my youth, the simple joys found in the mysteries of Agrippa's world, faded into the background, replaced by a colder, harsher truth, the relentless pursuit of scientific discovery which promised the glory but harbored hidden thorns. Chapter 3. By the time I hit 17, my parents had decided it was time for me to leave the cozy confines of Geneva and head to the university at Ingolstadt. Up until then, I had attended the local schools, but my father believed I needed exposure to a wider world to complete my education. The date for my departure was set, but life had a nasty surprise waiting for us before I could leave. Elizabeth, my closest companion since childhood, caught a severe case of scarlet fever. It hit her hard, and there were moments when we thought we might lose her. Despite everyone's pleas, my mother insisted on taking care of her. Her devotion paid off. Elizabeth pulled through, but at a terrible cost. My mother fell ill next, her fever raging with alarming intensity. The doctors wore that grim look that said everything without saying a word. Even on her deathbed, my mother's strength and kindness never wavered. She clasped Elizabeth's and my hands together. "My children," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "My greatest hope was to see you united. Your father will find comfort in this. Elizabeth, you must take my place for your younger siblings. I regret leaving you all, but I hope we will meet again in another world." She passed away peacefully, her face still radiating love. The days that followed were a haze of grief. It's a strange thing, trying to accept that someone so integral to your life is gone forever. Her voice, her presence, all vanished. Time, they say, heals all wounds, but the initial sting is unbearable. Eventually, though, the sharp pain dulls to an ache and life moves on, no matter how much you might wish otherwise. With my mother gone, my departure for Ingolstadt was postponed. I needed a few weeks to process everything. It felt sacrilegious to abandon my mourning family so soon. I needed to see Elizabeth find some semblance of peace before I could leave. She, in turn, tried to be our pillar of strength, her own grief buried under a veneer of courage. Her smiles, though rare, were rays of sunshine breaking through our collective gloom. The day I was finally set to leave, Clerval, my best friend, came over to spend the evening. He had tried to convince his father to let him join me at Ingolstadt, but his father, a stubborn old businessman, saw only ruin in his son's ambitions. Clerval hid his disappointment well, but his eyes told a different story. We stayed up late, unable to say our final goodbyes. Morning came too soon, and as I boarded the car that would take me away, my father gave me his blessing, Clerval squeezed my hand, and Elizabeth made me promise to write often. As we drove away, melancholy weighed heavily on me. I'd always been surrounded by loved ones, and now I faced the daunting prospect of making new friends in a foreign place. Yet, as the miles passed, my spirits lifted. The thrill of the unknown and the pursuit of knowledge beckoned me forward. The journey to Ingolstadt was long and exhausting, but eventually the town's white steeple came into view. I was led to a small, solitary apartment where I would spend my first night. The next morning, I presented my letters of introduction and met some of the professors. The first was Monsieur Krempe, a short, gruff man with little patience for the mystical sciences I had studied in Geneva. He dismissed my interests in alchemy with barely concealed contempt and handed me a list of more acceptable books to study. Undeterred, I attended a lecture by another professor, Monsieur Waldman. He was a stark contrast to Krempe, kind, with a voice that drew you in. His lecture on the history of chemistry was mesmerizing. He spoke with passion about the achievements of modern science, dispelling the lofty promises of the past. The ancient teachers promised impossibilities, he said, while modern scientists have performed miracles. We have unlocked nature's secrets, commanded the elements, and even glimpsed the shadows of the invisible world. His words struck a chord deep within me. Here was a path that combined my fascination with the mystical with the rigor of modern science. That night, sleep eluded me as my mind raced with possibilities. By morning, I was resolved to pursue this new direction. I visited Monsieur Waldman the next day, and his kindness in private only solidified my decision. He listened to my story with genuine interest, validating the importance of my earlier studies. He explained that even misguided efforts could lead to significant discoveries. Encouraged, I asked for his guidance on what to read and study. I am pleased to have a new disciple, he said. If you apply yourself, I have no doubt you will succeed. Chemistry has seen the most significant advancements, but do not neglect other branches of science. A well-rounded education is crucial. He showed me his laboratory, explaining the various machines and tools. He promised to lend me equipment once I was ready and gave me a list of books to start with. As I left his house, I felt a sense of destiny settling upon me. That day marked the beginning of a journey that would lead me down a path of unimaginable discovery and unfathomable horror. Chapter 4. From that day forward, natural philosophy, particularly chemistry, became my obsession. Modern texts on the subjects, rich with genius and insight, consumed my every waking moment. I attended lectures religiously and mingled with the scientific elite at the university. Even Monsieur Krempe, with his bulldog face and surly manners, became a source of invaluable knowledge. But it was Monsieur Waldman who truly became my guide. His kindness was never overbearing, his teaching never pedantic. He illuminated the most complex concepts with a clarity that felt almost magical, making the abstruse accessible. My dedication was erratic at first, but it soon solidified into a fervent passion. Many nights I worked until the stars faded, still bent over my experiments. My relentless pursuit of knowledge earned me a reputation among both students and faculty. Krempe often teased me about my early fascination with Cornelius Agrippa, but even he couldn't hide his grudging respect for my progress. Waldman, on the other hand, beamed with genuine pride. 2 years passed in this intense focus, with no trips back to Geneva. The allure of scientific discovery had me in its grip. Unlike other fields, science offers endless opportunities for discovery. When you follow a single path with unwavering focus, proficiency is inevitable. My progress was so rapid that I made significant improvements to some chemical instruments, earning high praise from my professors. At this juncture, when I thought about returning home, an incident occurred that delayed my plans. I became fascinated by the structure of the human body, pondering the origins of life itself. This question, shrouded in mystery, captivated me. I delved deeper into physiology, driven by a nearly supernatural zeal. To understand life, I realized, one must first understand death. Anatomy wasn't enough. I needed to witness the natural decay of the human body. Despite my father's efforts to shield me from superstitions, I found myself drawn to the macabre. Graveyards became my classroom, and the once beautiful forms of the deceased my subjects. I dissected and analyzed every minute detail of decomposition. It was during these morbid studies that I experienced a breakthrough, a sudden, blinding light of understanding that left me dizzy with its implications. Among the many brilliant minds studying this field, I alone had discovered the secret of life. Don't think me mad, the sun itself does not shine more certainly than the truth of my discovery. It seemed miraculous, but the process was clear and logical. After countless sleepless nights, I succeeded in uncovering the cause of life itself. More astonishingly, I found I could animate lifeless matter. The initial shock of this realization quickly gave way to an ecstatic euphoria. After so much arduous labor, to achieve my ultimate goal was indescribably gratifying. The magnitude of my discovery erased the memory of my painstaking steps. What had been the unattainable dream of countless sages was now within my grasp. The knowledge I had gained didn't hand me the finished product, but directed my efforts toward its realization. I felt like an adventurer who had escaped the darkness of a tomb by a single flickering light. I see your curiosity, my friend, but you must understand why I cannot share the secret. Hear my tale to its end, and you'll grasp why I am reticent. Knowledge can be perilous, and the pursuit of it even more so. When I realized the power I held, I hesitated on how to use it. Although I could animate the lifeless, constructing a suitable vessel was daunting. Should I create a being like myself or something simpler? My initial success had inflated my confidence, and I resolved to create a complex, human-like creature. The materials at hand seemed insufficient, but I was undeterred. I prepared for setbacks, knowing that each failure was a step toward success. The enormity of my task did not dissuade me. I decided to make the creature enormous, about 8 feet tall, to ease the intricacy of the work. Months of labor followed, collecting and organizing my materials. No one can imagine the storm of emotions that drove me. Life and death became mere boundaries for me to breach, flooding the dark world with light. A new species would worship me as its creator. Their gratitude would be boundless. These thoughts fueled my relentless pursuit. My health deteriorated, my complexion paled, and my frame withered. Failure hovered over me like a specter, but hope kept me going. The moon watched over my nightly labors as I hunted nature's secrets. The horrors of my work, disturbing graves, dissecting cadavers, experimenting on living animals, haunt me even now. Yet back then, a frenzied determination pushed me forward. Summer came and went, its beauty lost on me. Fields flourished and vineyards thrived, but my eyes were blind to it all. My father's letters, full of concern, went unanswered. My silence troubled him, but my obsession left no room for guilt or distraction. I became like a man possessed, my purpose singular and consuming. My work progressed, but my soul withered. Anxiety gnawed at me, my fevered mind shying away from human contact. My father's reproaches echoed in my mind, yet my goal seemed too vital to abandon. A perfect human maintains a serene mind, free from obsessive passion. My quest had isolated me, weakening my affections and alienating me from simple joys. Winter turned to spring, then summer again as I labored on. My work neared completion, each day bringing me closer to success. But my zeal had a cost. Every night, a fever gripped me and I recoiled from others, haunted by my own deeds. Despite my declining health, I pressed on, convinced that the completion of my work would restore me. My father's concern remained unspoken, his letters inquiring about my activities without a reproach. Seasons changed, but I remained consumed by my project. The end was in sight, yet my nerves frayed and my isolation deepened. Anxiety tempered my excitement, and I labored like a prisoner to his task, driven by the hope that once my creation was complete, I could reclaim my life. Chapter 5. It was on a dreary November night that I witnessed the culmination of my labor. With a mix of excitement and dread, I gathered the instruments of life around me, ready to ignite a spark of existence into the lifeless form at my feet. The clock had just struck 1, rain tapped relentlessly against the windows, and my candle was flickering its last when, through the dim light, I saw the creature's dull yellow eye open. It took a ragged breath, and its limbs twitched convulsively. How can I describe my emotions at this moment, or the horror of the thing I had painstakingly crafted? Its limbs were in proportion, and I had chosen its features to be beautiful. Beautiful, great God! Its yellow skin barely concealed the underlying muscles and veins. Its hair was a lustrous black, flowing like a river of ink. Its teeth were pearly white. Yet these elements only heightened the horror of its watery eyes, set in pale, deathly sockets, and its shriveled complexion framed by straight black lips. Life's vicissitudes are not as changeable as the human heart. I had labored for nearly 2 years, driven by a single goal, to breathe life into an inanimate body. For this, I had sacrificed rest and health. But now, as I looked upon my creation, the beauty of my dream vanished, replaced by sheer horror and disgust. Unable to bear the sight of what I had wrought, I fled the room, pacing my bedroom in agitation, unable to sleep. Exhaustion finally overtook me, and I collapsed onto my bed, still fully clothed, seeking the oblivion of sleep. But sleep offered no refuge. I was plagued by wild dreams. I saw Elizabeth, healthy and radiant, walking the streets of Ingolstadt. Overjoyed, I embraced her, but as I kissed her lips, they turned the color of death, her features shifted, and I found myself holding my deceased mother's corpse. Her form was wrapped in a shroud, and grave worms crawled through the folds of flannel. I woke in horror, drenched in cold sweat, my teeth chattering, my limbs convulsing. By the dim moonlight filtering through the shutters, I saw the wretch I had created. He was standing beside my bed, peering at me with those lifeless eyes. His jaw moved, producing guttural sounds, while a grotesque grin twisted his face. One hand reached out, as if to hold me back, but I bolted, rushing downstairs and out into the courtyard. I spent the rest of the night there, pacing in terror, jumping at every sound, fearing the approach of the monstrosity I had brought to life. No mortal could endure the horror of that face. Even a reanimated mummy would be less hideous. I had seen him unfinished, and he was ugly then. Now, with his muscles and joints animated, he was a nightmare beyond anything Dante could have imagined. That night was pure torment. My pulse pounded so hard I felt every beat. Other times, I nearly fainted from exhaustion and fear. My dreams had turned from pleasant fantasies into hellish visions, and the change was so sudden and complete it left me reeling. Morning finally came, dismal and rainy. The church's white steeple and clock indicated it was 6. The porter opened the gates, and I hurried into the streets, desperate to escape the horror lurking in every shadow. I didn't dare return to my apartment, so I wandered aimlessly through the city, hoping the exercise would lighten my mental burden. My heart raced with fear, and I walked quickly, avoiding the specter I feared might appear at any moment. As I walked, I saw a coach approaching. It stopped near me, and out sprang Henry Clerval. "My dear Frankenstein," he exclaimed, "how glad I am to see you! How fortunate to find you here!" His presence was a balm for my tortured soul. Seeing him reminded me of home, my father, and Elizabeth. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of joy. I clasped his hand, momentarily forgetting my horror and misfortune. We walked to my college, Clerval chatting about mutual friends and his struggles to persuade his father to let him study at Ingolstadt. You can imagine the difficulty, he said, in convincing him that life consists of more than bookkeeping, but here I am, ready to explore the land of knowledge. It's wonderful to see you, I replied, though my mind was still haunted by the previous night's events. We soon reached my apartment, but the thought of the creature lurking there made me tremble. I asked Clerval to wait at the bottom of the stairs while I checked. My heart pounded as I approached the door, expecting to see the monster. I threw the door open, bracing myself, but the room was empty. The relief was so intense that I clapped my hands with joy and ran back to Clerval. We ascended to my room and breakfast was brought up, but I was too restless to eat. I felt a strange exhilaration, my pulse racing, unable to stay still. Clerval noticed my agitation and attributed it to joy at his arrival, but as he observed me more closely, he saw a wildness in my eyes that alarmed him. "My dear Victor," he cried, "what's the matter? You look terribly ill." "Do not ask," I replied, covering my eyes. I imagined the monster creeping into the room. "Save me! Save me!" I thought I felt its grasp and fell into a fit. Poor Clerval, his joyful reunion turned into a nightmare. I lay lifeless for a long time, slipping into a nervous fever that confined me for months. Henry, ever faithful, concealed the extent of my illness from my family, sparing them worry. His care and patience were my salvation. I slowly recovered, haunted by visions of the monster. Henry listened to my ravings, initially dismissing them as delusions. But my persistent references to the creature convinced him something terrible had happened. Spring came, bringing new life and a gradual return to health. As I gazed at the budding trees, joy and affection revived in me. My gloom lifted, and I began to feel like myself again. "Dearest Clerval," I exclaimed, "how can I ever repay you for your kindness?" "Just get well," he replied, "and maybe write to your family. They're worried about you." His words made me tremble. Could he mean the creature? But he reassured me it was only a letter my family desired. As I recovered, Henry and I resumed our studies, though my focus shifted to literature and language. Clerval's enthusiasm for the East inspired me to join him. The melancholy and joy of Oriental literature soothed and uplifted me, offering a refuge from my haunted past. Summer passed in peaceful study. My return to Geneva was delayed by accidents, but I spent the winter with Henry, rediscovering the simple pleasures of life. By spring, I felt ready to face the world again, my soul revived by Clerval's companionship and the beauty of nature. Chapter 6. Clerval handed me a crumpled letter, the edges frayed like the nerves behind my eyes. It was from Elizabeth, my dear Elizabeth. "Hey Vic, word on the street is you've been down for the count. Henry's updates help, but I'm still on edge. They won't even let you hold a pen, but I need to hear from you. One word, that's all I ask. I've been pacing, waiting for the mailman, hoping for something, anything from you. Uncle's been ready to hop a plane to Ingolstadt, but I've managed to keep him grounded. Still, I've regretted not jumping on a flight myself. I keep picturing you stuck with some soulless nurse who couldn't care less about you. Clerval says you're getting better, but I need to hear it from you. Come back to us, Vic. We've got a warm, lively home waiting for you. Dad's in good health, just aching to see you and know you're okay. Ernest is 16 now, full of energy and dreams. He wants to join the military, see the world, but we can't let him go until you're home. He's not like you. Studying bores him to death. He spends his days outside, climbing hills, rowing on the lake. If we don't let him follow his dreams, I'm afraid he'll waste away. Not much has changed here, except the kids growing up. The lake is still blue, the mountains still snowy. Our little world feels the same, governed by the same unchanging laws. My days are filled with small tasks, but seeing happy faces around me makes it all worthwhile. Since you left, only one thing's different. Remember Justine Moritz? Probably not. Quick recap. Her mom, Madame Moritz, was a widow with 4 kids, and Justine was her dad's favorite. After he died, her mom treated her horribly. Auntie noticed and convinced Madame Moritz to let Justine live with us when she was 12. Here in Geneva, we don't see servants the same way they do in France or England. Justine became a part of our family, learning the ropes without losing her dignity. Please, Vic, write back. I need to know you're okay. The ink smudged where her tears had fallen, each drop a testament to her worry, her love. I folded the letter carefully, tucking it into my pocket. The room felt colder, the shadows deeper. Elizabeth's words lingered in the air, mixing with the hum of the city outside. The supernatural seemed to thread through our ordinary lives, binding us in ways we couldn't see but always felt. I stared at the ceiling, the weight of the letter heavy in my pocket, and wondered what the future held for us. The darkness outside the windows seemed to pulse with unseen horrors, but inside, in that moment, there was only the promise of Elizabeth's unwavering love and the hope of a brighter tomorrow. Remember Justine? She was your favorite, always able to melt your bad moods with just one glance. You once said she had the same effect as listening to a Taylor Swift song on a bad day. She was so open-hearted and genuinely happy. Auntie adored her, and because of that, gave her an education far beyond what anyone expected. Justine soaked it all in, never bragging, but you could see her gratitude shining in her eyes. She adored Auntie, tried to mimic her every move, and even now she sometimes reminds me of her. When Auntie died, everyone was too wrapped up in their grief to notice Justine, who had nursed her with such tender care. Poor Justine was devastated, and more heartbreak was on the horizon. One by one, her siblings died, leaving her mother childless except for her. Racked with guilt, her mother believed their deaths were a divine punishment for her favoritism. A devout Catholic, she had her confessor confirm this twisted idea. A few months after you left for Ingolstadt, Justine was summoned home by her repentant mother. She cried when she left us. The once lively girl was now softened by grief, her vivacious spirit dimmed. Her time back home was no joy. Her mother's repentance wavered. Sometimes she begged Justine for forgiveness, but more often blamed her for the deaths of her siblings. The constant stress took its toll on Madame Moritz, leading to her decline. Initially, it made her more irritable, but she eventually found peace in death, succumbing to the winter cold. Justine has returned to us, and I love her dearly. She's clever, gentle, and very pretty, often reminding me of Auntie. And now, a few words about little William. I wish you could see him. He's grown tall for his age, with sparkling blue eyes, dark lashes, and curly hair. When he smiles, dimples pop up on his rosy cheeks. He's already had a couple of little crushes, but his favorite is Louisa Byron, a sweet 5-year-old. Now, dear Victor, let me indulge you in some local gossip. The lovely Miss Mansfield is engaged to a young Englishman, John Melbourne, Esquire. Her less attractive sister, Manon, married Monsieur Duvillard, the rich banker, last fall. Your old schoolmate, Louis Manoir, has had a rough time since Clerval left Geneva, but he's bounced back and is rumored to be marrying a lively French widow, Madame Tavernier. She's older than him, but quite popular and well-liked. Writing this has lifted my spirits, dear cousin, but as I finish, my worry returns. Please, Victor, just a line or even a word would be a blessing to us. 10,000 thanks to Henry for his kindness, his letters, and his affection. We are sincerely grateful. Take care of yourself, my cousin, and please write. Elizabeth Lavenza, Geneva, March 18th, 2024. Dear, dear Elizabeth, I exclaimed, reading her letter. I'll write back right now and ease their worry. The effort of writing left me exhausted, but it marked the start of my recovery. Within 2 weeks, I was finally able to leave my room. One of my first tasks was introducing Clerval to the university professors. Each meeting felt like a trial, stirring the mental wounds left by that cursed night when my life fell apart. Natural philosophy now filled me with dread. Even after regaining my physical health, the sight of any scientific equipment sent shockwaves through my nerves. Henry saw this and discreetly removed all traces of my past work, even changing my room to spare me from memories. Yet visiting the professors brought all the horror back. M. Waldman's praise of my scientific progress felt like a slow, cruel torture. He couldn't understand my discomfort, mistaking it for modesty, and switched topics, trying to draw me into a discussion on science. It was agony, like he was laying out instruments for my execution. I squirmed under his words but hid my pain. Clerval, ever perceptive, diverted the conversation with his feigned ignorance. I silently thanked him, though I knew he was puzzled. Despite our deep bond, I couldn't bring myself to share my dark secret. M. Kramp, less sensitive, praised me bluntly, causing even more distress than Waldman's kind words. "Damn the fellow," he exclaimed. "Clerval, he's surpassed us all." A few years ago, he believed in Cornelius Agrippa like gospel, and now he's top of the university. If he's not stopped, we'll all be embarrassed. Ah, look at his modesty. Young men should be diffident, you know. I was, but it doesn't last. Kramp's self-congratulation thankfully shifted the focus away from me. Clerval, uninterested in natural science, immersed himself in Eastern languages, aiming for a grand future. His dedication to Persian, Arabic, and Sanskrit inspired me to join him. Fleeing my former studies, I found solace in these new pursuits. Unlike Clerval, I wasn't aiming for mastery but sought distraction and relief in the melancholic yet uplifting literature of the Orient. The summer passed in these activities, delaying my return to Geneva until winter. Snow and impassable roads postponed my journey until spring, a delay I felt bitterly. I longed for home and friends, but didn't want to leave Clerval alone. Despite the winter's harshness, we spent it cheerfully, and the late arriving spring was worth the wait. By May, I expected a letter finalizing my departure when Henry proposed a walking tour around Ingolstadt. I agreed eagerly. Exercise and Clerval's company were welcome. For 2 weeks we wandered, my health and spirits improving in the fresh air and lively conversations. Study had isolated me, but Clerval reawakened my love for nature and human connection. His gentleness and affection thawed my heart, returning me to a happier, carefree self. The serene spring, with blooming flowers and vibrant fields, filled me with joy. Unburdened by past horrors, I felt reborn. Henry shared in my happiness, his imaginative mind and stories, often inspired by Persian and Arabic tales, enchanting me. He recited my favorite poems and engaged me in lively debates, showcasing his intellect and creativity. We returned to the university on a sunny Sunday afternoon. Peasants were dancing, everyone cheerful, my spirits soared, and I walked with unbridled joy, embracing the world anew. Chapter 7. On my return, I found a letter waiting for me, its edges frayed, like it had absorbed the pain within. It was from my father. Dear Victor, you've probably been waiting impatiently for a letter telling you when to come home. I wanted to write just a few lines with the date, but that would be cruel. How can I bear to break your heart when you expect a joyful reunion? I can't shield you from our sorrow. Absence hasn't hardened you to our family's joys and griefs, and now you're seeking the words that will deliver the horrific news. William is dead. That sweet child whose laughter filled our home with warmth has been murdered. I won't try to console you, I'll just tell you what happened. Last Thursday, May 7th, I took a walk with my niece and your brothers in Plum Palais. It was a warm, calm evening, and we walked farther than usual. Dusk had fallen by the time we thought of heading back, and we realized that William and Ernest, who had run ahead, were missing. We sat on a bench, waiting. Ernest returned, asking if we'd seen William. He said they'd been playing, and William ran off to hide. Ernest had searched and waited, but William didn't come back. We were alarmed and continued searching as night fell. Elizabeth guessed he might have gone home, but he wasn't there. We went out again with torches, the thought of my sweet boy lost and alone tormenting me. Elizabeth was in agony. Around 5 in the morning, I found him. The night before, he was vibrant and full of life. Now he lay on the grass, lifeless, with the mark of the murderer's fingers on his neck. We brought him home, my anguish revealing the terrible truth to Elizabeth. She was desperate to see him. I tried to stop her, but she insisted. When she saw the marks, she cried out, "Oh God, I have murdered my darling child." She fainted and was barely revived. When she did come to, she could only weep. She told me William had begged to wear a valuable miniature of your mother that night. It's gone now, likely the motive for the murder. We have no leads on the killer despite our efforts, but nothing will bring back my beloved William. Come home, Victor. Only you can console Elizabeth. She blames herself, and her grief is unbearable. We're all suffering, but doesn't that make your return even more crucial? Your dear mother, thank God she didn't live to see this nightmare. Come, not with thoughts of vengeance, but with peace and gentleness to heal our shattered hearts. Enter this house of mourning with kindness and love for those who need you. Your affectionate and heartbroken father, Alphonse Frankenstein, Geneva, May 12, 2024. In. The words on the page blurred as tears filled my eyes. The room seemed to close in, the shadows deepening, as if they knew the darkness that had befallen my family. I clutched the letter, feeling a chill that went beyond the physical, a creeping dread that settled into my bones. My mind raced with images of William, his innocent smile, now forever lost. The supernatural and the mundane intertwined, casting a pall over the ordinary, making everything feel twisted and wrong. I knew I had to go home, to face the horror, to be there for Elizabeth and my father. But the thought of seeing William's lifeless body, of confronting the pain and the guilt, was almost more than I could bear. Yet I had no choice. The shadows whispered of secrets and vengeance, but I had to fight that darkness with every ounce of my being, for my family, for William, for myself. Clerval, his eyes fixed on my face as I read the letter, saw the joy drain away, replaced by despair so profound it was almost tangible. I threw the letter on the table and buried my face in my hands. "My dear Frankenstein," Henry exclaimed, watching me weep with a bitterness that seemed to shatter the room's air. "Must you always be unhappy? What on earth has happened?" I motioned for him to read the letter, pacing the room in agitation. Clerval's eyes filled with tears as he read about my misfortune. "I can offer no consolation," he said, his voice thick with sorrow. "This is an irreparable disaster. What are you going to do?" "Go to Geneva immediately. Come with me, Henry. We need to arrange transportation." As we walked, Clerval tried to comfort me, but all he could offer was his heartfelt sympathy. "Poor William," he said, his voice trembling. "That sweet child, now gone. Who could have seen him, so full of life, and not weep at his loss? To die so horribly, to feel the murderer's hands on him, it's unthinkable, but at least he's at rest now, no more suffering. We must mourn, but he no longer needs our pity." His words echoed in my mind as we hurried through the streets, a cityscape of flickering streetlights and shadowed alleys. When the cab arrived, I climbed in, bidding a somber farewell to my friend. The journey was bleak. At first, I wanted to rush to comfort my grieving family, but as I neared my hometown, fear slowed my progress. I hadn't been home in nearly 6 years. Everything could have changed, and William's death was just the beginning. 1,000 tiny dreadful possibilities crowded my mind, each one more terrifying than the last. I spent 2 days in Lausanne, my mind in turmoil. The calm lake, the serene mountains brought a measure of peace. The waters were still, the snowy peaks unchanged, and slowly the beauty of the scene restored some calm to my soul. Then I continued my journey to Geneva. The road hugged the lake, which grew narrower as I approached my hometown. The dark sides of Jura and the bright peak of Mont Blanc became more distinct. Tears filled my eyes. "Dear mountains, my beautiful lake, how do you welcome your wanderer? Your summits are clear, the sky and lake serene. Are you promising peace or mocking my misery? I fear, my friend, that I may bore you with these details, but they were days of relative happiness, and I remember them fondly. My homeland, my beloved country. Only a native can understand the joy of seeing its streams, mountains, and lovely lake again." Yet, as I neared home, grief and fear once more overwhelmed me. Night fell and the mountains turned into looming shadows. The scene felt vast and ominous, foretelling a future of unparalleled misery. Sadly, my premonition was true. I had only glimpsed a fraction of the anguish I was destined to endure. As the cab creaked and groaned its way through the familiar yet alien streets, my heart pounded with a dread that had nothing to do with the journey itself. It was the unknown, the lurking horror of what awaited me at home. The shadows seemed to whisper, the wind carrying the faint echoes of something malevolent, something that had shattered the fragile peace of my family. And as I stared out into the gathering darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt me for the rest of my days. It was pitch black by the time I arrived on the outskirts of Geneva. The city gates were locked tight, forcing me to spend the night in Secheron, a small village just a short drive away. The sky was clear and sleep eluded me, so I decided to visit the spot where my poor William had been murdered. With the gates closed, I had to take a boat across the lake to reach Plainpalais. The short voyage was surreal. Lightning danced around the summit of Mont Blanc, casting eerie, beautiful shapes in the sky. The storm approached fast, and as I landed, I climbed a small hill to watch its progress. The clouds rolled in, and soon large drops of rain began to fall, quickly turning into a downpour. I left my perch and continued walking, despite the storm's growing fury. Thunder exploded overhead, reverberating off the surrounding mountains, while lightning turned the lake into a shimmering sheet of fire. The darkness between flashes was so complete, it felt like the world ceased to exist in those moments. Multiple storms raged across the sky, each illuminating different parts of the heavens. One particularly violent storm hung over the northern part of the lake, another cast faint flashes over Jura, and a third shrouded and occasionally revealed the mole, a sharp peak to the east. Mesmerized by the tempest, I wandered on, my spirits strangely lifted by the celestial battle. I raised my hands to the sky and shouted, "William, dear angel, this is your funeral, this your dirge." Just then, I saw a figure slip out from behind a cluster of trees. I stood frozen, staring. A flash of lightning revealed its grotesque, towering form. It was the wretch, the filthy demon I had created. What was he doing here? Could he be, my mind shuddered at the thought, the murderer of my brother? The conviction hit me like a bolt of lightning. My teeth chattered, and I had to lean against a tree for support. The figure moved quickly past me, vanishing into the storm. No human could have killed William. He was the murderer. I had no doubt. The very thought seemed proof enough. I considered chasing him, but it would have been futile. Another flash revealed him scaling the nearly vertical cliffs of Mont Salève, the hill that borders Plainpalais to the south. He reached the summit and disappeared. I stood there, paralyzed. The thunder quieted, but the rain continued, shrouding everything in impenetrable darkness. Memories I had tried to bury resurfaced. The night of his creation, the horror of seeing my own handiwork come to life beside my bed, and his escape. Nearly 2 years had passed since that night. Was this his first crime? I had unleashed a depraved fiend on the world, a creature whose joy was in death and suffering. Had he not murdered my brother? The anguish I felt that night, alone in the cold and wet, was beyond anything I'd ever known. The weather didn't bother me. My mind was lost in scenes of terror and despair. I thought of the monster I had unleashed, a creature with the will and power to commit acts of unspeakable horror. It was as if I had summoned my own vampire, my own spirit, bent on destroying everything I loved. As dawn broke, I made my way to the city. The gates were open and I hurried to my father's house. My first thought was to reveal what I knew about the murderer and initiate a hunt. But then I paused. How could I explain that a being I had created had met me at midnight on a remote mountain? The nervous fever I had suffered at the time of his creation would make my story sound like a madman's delirium. If anyone else told me such a tale, I would think them insane. Besides, the creature's nature made him impossible to capture, even if I could convince my family to try. Who could catch something capable of scaling Mont Salève's cliffs? These thoughts made my decision clear. I had to remain silent. It was around 5 in the morning when I crept into my father's house, the quiet broken only by the soft ticking of a grandfather clock. I told the servants not to disturb the family and slipped into the library, waiting for them to wake up. 6 years had passed in a blur, but here I was, standing in the very spot where I'd last hugged my father before leaving for Ingolstadt. The familiar smell of old books and polished wood filled the air. Above the mantelpiece hung a portrait of my mother, Caroline Beaufort, captured in a moment of agony as she knelt beside her father's coffin. Her rustic dress and pale cheeks belied the air of dignity and beauty that seemed to transcend her grief. Below it was a miniature of William, and my tears flowed freely as I gazed at his innocent face. Ernest entered quietly, his face lighting up with a sorrowful joy when he saw me. "Welcome, dear Victor," he said, his voice cracking. "I wish you'd come 3 months ago. You would have found us happy. Now you're here to share a misery that nothing can soothe. But your presence might revive our father, who seems to be sinking under this misfortune, and maybe you can convince poor Elizabeth to stop blaming herself." Poor William, he was our pride and joy. Tears streamed down Ernest's face, and a wave of mortal agony washed over me. Until now, I had only imagined the misery of our desolated home. The reality was a fresh, unbearable disaster. I tried to calm Ernest, asking about our father and Elizabeth. "She needs the most consolation," Ernest said. "She blames herself for William's death, but since the murderer has been discovered—" "The murderer discovered? How? Who could pursue him? It's impossible. One might as well chase the wind or trap a river with a net. I saw him last night, free as ever." "I don't understand," Ernest replied, bewildered. "The discovery has only added to our misery. No one believed it at first, and even now Elizabeth can't accept it, despite all the evidence. Who would believe that Justine Moritz, so kind and loved by all, could commit such a horrifying crime?" "Justine Moritz, poor girl, she's the accused. But it's impossible. Everyone knows she's innocent, surely." "No one did at first, but evidence surfaced that nearly forced us to believe. Her behavior has been so confused, adding weight to the accusations. She's being tried today. You'll hear everything." Ernest explained that Justine had fallen ill the morning William's body was found, confined to her bed for days. During that time, a servant found the miniature of our mother in her pocket, the very same one that had disappeared the night of the murder. The servant took it to a magistrate, and Justine was arrested. Her extreme confusion during questioning only deepened the suspicion. The story was bizarre, but it didn't shake my faith. "You're all mistaken. I know the murderer. Justine is innocent." At that moment, my father entered, his face etched with sorrow. He tried to greet me cheerfully, but Ernest blurted out, "Papa, Victor says he knows who killed William." "We do too, unfortunately," my father replied. "I'd rather never have known such betrayal from someone we valued so highly." "My dear father, you're mistaken. Justine is innocent." "If she is, God forbid she should suffer as guilty. She's to be tried today, and I sincerely hope she'll be acquitted." His words calmed me. I was convinced that no human could be guilty of this crime. I feared that no circumstantial evidence could convict her. My story was too outlandish to tell. Its horror would be seen as madness. Who would believe, except me, that such a monster existed? Elizabeth soon joined us. Time had enhanced her beauty, adding depth to her candor and vivacity. She welcomed me warmly. "Your arrival, dear cousin, gives me hope. Perhaps you can prove Justine's innocence. If she's convicted, I'll never be happy again. But she won't be, will she? I'm sure she won't." "She is innocent, Elizabeth," I assured her, "and that will be proven. Fear nothing. Her acquittal is certain." "How kind you are. Everyone else believes in her guilt, which made me wretched, but you've given me hope." She wept, relieved. "Dearest niece," my father said gently, "dry your tears. If she's innocent, trust in our laws and my efforts to ensure a fair trial." The morning light began to filter through the windows, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper of the unseen horrors we faced. The world outside continued as always, oblivious to our pain. As I stood there, surrounded by my grieving family, I knew that our lives would never be the same. The monster I had unleashed had not only taken William, but had set in motion a chain of events that would haunt us forever. And somewhere out there, in the dark corners of the world, it was still lurking, waiting to strike again. Chapter 8. We passed a few heavy hours until the clock struck 11, the time for the trial. My father and the rest of the family were required as witnesses, so I joined them at the courthouse. Every moment of that mockery of justice was living torture for me. It was about to be decided whether the consequences of my curiosity and forbidden experiments would lead to the death of two innocent beings, one a joyful child, now silenced forever, the other a girl of merit, destined for a bright future, now facing an ignominious grave because of me. I would have confessed in her place 1,000 times over, but I was absent when the crime was committed. Any such confession would be dismissed as madness and wouldn't exonerate Justine, who suffered because of me. Justine appeared calm, dressed in mourning. Her usually engaging countenance was now marked by a solemn beauty. She seemed confident in her innocence, her composure strained but unbroken, despite being the focus of thousands of accusing eyes. Her tranquility, though, was a mask. Behind it, she mustered all her courage. As she entered the court, her eyes found us, and a single tear betrayed her sorrow before she regained her composure, a look of sorrowful affection confirming her innocence to me. The trial began. The prosecutor laid out the charges, and several witnesses took the stand. Strange facts combined against her, which might have swayed anyone without my certain knowledge of her innocence. She had been out all night when the murder happened, seen near the crime scene by a market woman early in the morning. When asked what she was doing there, she gave a confused, unintelligible answer. She returned home around 8 o'clock and when questioned said she'd been searching for William. When she saw the body, she fell into violent hysterics and was bedridden for days. Then the picture of my mother, found in her pocket, was shown, and Elizabeth, her voice faltering, confirmed it was the same one she had given William just an hour before he disappeared. Horror and indignation filled the court. Justine was called for her defense. Her face had transformed with the trial, surprise, horror, and misery etched deeply. She struggled with tears but gathered her strength and spoke in a clear though unsteady voice. God knows I am innocent. I don't expect my words alone to prove it. I rely on a straightforward explanation of the facts against me, and I hope my character will guide my judges to a favorable interpretation where doubts exist. She explained that, with Elizabeth's permission, she spent the evening of the murder at her aunt's house in Shane, a village a few miles from Geneva. On her way back around 9 o'clock, a man asked if she'd seen the missing child. Alarmed, she spent hours searching for him. When Geneva's gates shut, she stayed in a barn rather than disturb friends. She spent the night there, falling asleep briefly near dawn. Awakened by noises, she left to continue her search. She had no idea she had been near William's body. Her confusion when questioned by the market woman was understandable after a sleepless, anxious night. She couldn't explain the picture in her pocket. I know how heavily this weighs against me, but I can't explain it. I can only guess how it got there. I believe I have no enemies, and no one would destroy me out of spite. Did the murderer place it there? I don't know how or why he would. Why steal it just to discard it again? At that moment, my father entered, his face marked with deep sorrow. He tried to greet me cheerfully, but Ernest interrupted. "Papa, Victor says he knows who killed William." "We do too, unfortunately," my father replied, "though I'd rather never have known such betrayal from someone I valued." "My dear father, you're mistaken. Justine is innocent." "If she is, God forbid she should suffer as guilty. Her trial is today, and I hope she'll be acquitted." His words calmed me. I was certain that no human could have committed this crime. The real story was too terrifying to tell. It would be seen as madness. Who would believe, except me, that such a creature existed? Elizabeth joined us soon after. Time had only enhanced her beauty, adding depth to her candor and vivacity. She welcomed me warmly. Your arrival gives me hope. Perhaps you can prove Justine's innocence. If she's convicted, I'll never be happy again. But she won't be, will she? I'm sure she won't. She is innocent, Elizabeth, I assured her, and that will be proven. Fear nothing, her acquittal is certain. How kind you are! Everyone else believes her guilty and it made me wretched, but you've given me hope. She wept, relieved. Dearest niece, my father said gently, dry your tears. If she's innocent, trust in our laws and my efforts to ensure a fair trial. As dawn broke, casting long shadows that whispered of unseen horrors, the world outside continued as always, oblivious to our pain. Our lives had changed irrevocably, haunted by a monster that not only took William but set off a chain of events that would follow us forever. And somewhere out there, in the dark corners of the world, it still lurked, waiting to strike again. I commit my cause to the justice of my judges, yet I see no room for hope. I beg permission to have a few witnesses examined concerning my character, and if their testimony shall not outweigh my supposed guilt, I must be condemned, although I would pledge my salvation on my innocence. Several witnesses were called, people who had known Justine for years. They spoke well of her, but their fear of the crime she was accused of made them hesitant and unwilling to fully support her. Elizabeth, seeing this last lifeline fraying, stood up, agitated but determined, and asked to address the court. I am the cousin of the murdered child, or rather his sister, for I have lived with his parents long before his birth. It may seem improper for me to speak, but when I see a friend about to be condemned because of the cowardice of others, I must speak. I know Justine well. She lived with us for many years, and I found her to be the most kind-hearted person. She nursed my aunt, Madame Frankenstein, during her last illness with great care and affection, and later attended her own mother through a long illness, earning the admiration of everyone. She was like a mother to William. I don't hesitate to say that despite all the evidence against her, I believe in her innocence. She had no reason to commit this crime. As for the trinket that is the main evidence against her, if she had wanted it, I would have gladly given it to her. That's how much I trust and value her. A murmur of approval followed Elizabeth's heartfelt plea, but it was more for her bravery than in support of Justine. Public outrage against Justine only intensified, and she wept as Elizabeth spoke, but said nothing. My own torment during the trial was unbearable. I knew Justine was innocent. The demon who had killed William had set this all in motion. When I saw that the judges and the public had already condemned her, I fled the courtroom in agony. My guilt was a sharper torment than anything Justine felt. She was sustained by her innocence, while remorse tore at my soul relentlessly. That night was one of pure misery. In the morning, I returned to the court, my throat dry with dread. I couldn't bring myself to ask the fatal question, but the officer guessed my reason for being there. The verdict was in, all black ballots. Justine was condemned. I can't describe my feelings at that moment. I had known horror before, but nothing compared to the heart-sickening despair I felt then. The officer added that Justine had confessed. Her confession wasn't needed in such a clear case, but it's good she did. None of our judges like convicting on circumstantial evidence alone. This news was shocking. Had I misjudged everything? Was I as mad as the world would think if I revealed my suspicions? I rushed home, and Elizabeth eagerly asked the outcome. My cousin, I replied, it's as you expected. All judges would rather see 10 innocent people suffer than let one guilty person escape. But Justine has confessed. This was a crushing blow for Elizabeth, who had firmly believed in Justine's innocence. How can I ever believe in human goodness again? Justine, whom I loved like a sister, how could she deceive us all? Her gentle eyes seemed incapable of any malice, yet she committed murder. Soon we heard that Justine wanted to see Elizabeth. My father advised against it, but left the decision to her. "Yes," said Elizabeth, "I will go even if she is guilty, and you, Victor, must come with me. I can't go alone." The thought of the visit was torture, but I couldn't refuse. We entered the gloomy prison cell, where Justine sat on a straw mat at the far end, her hands shackled, head resting on her knees. She rose when she saw us, and when we were alone, she threw herself at Elizabeth's feet, weeping bitterly. Elizabeth wept too. "Oh, Justine!" Elizabeth's voice broke as she spoke, her eyes red and brimming with tears. "Why did you rob me of my last comfort? I trusted in your innocence. I was miserable before, but now I am utterly devastated." "And you believe I am so wicked? You join my enemies in condemning me as a murderer?" Justine's voice choked with sobs. "Stand up, my poor girl," said Elizabeth, her voice shaking. "Why kneel if you are innocent? I am not your enemy. I believed in your innocence until I heard your confession. If that report is false, nothing will shake my confidence in you except your own words." "I did confess, but it was a lie. I confessed to gain absolution. That lie weighs heavier on my heart than all my sins. God forgive me. Since my condemnation, my confessor has hounded me, threatening hellfire if I didn't admit guilt. Alone and abandoned, what choice did I have? I was forced into a lie, and now I am truly wretched." Justine paused, tears streaming down her face, then continued, "I couldn't bear the thought that you, sweet lady, believed I could commit such a monstrous crime. Dear William, blessed child, I will see you again in heaven, where we will all be happy. That thought consoles me as I face death and disgrace." "Oh, Justine, forgive me for doubting you, even for a moment. Why did you confess? But don't despair. I will prove your innocence. I will melt the hearts of your enemies with my tears and prayers. You shall not die. You, my playmate, my sister, will not perish on the scaffold. No, I could not survive such horror." Justine shook her head sadly. "I don't fear death. That pain has passed. God gives me strength to endure the worst. I live a bitter world, but if you remember me as unjustly condemned, I am resigned to my fate. Learn to submit patiently to heaven's will, dear lady." As they spoke, I retreated to a corner of the prison cell, trying to conceal my own torment. Despair, who dared talk of that? The poor victim, who would cross the boundary between life and death tomorrow, did not feel the same deep agony that I did. I ground my teeth, a groan escaping from the depths of my soul. Justine started, then approached me. "Dear sir, thank you for visiting me. You don't believe I'm guilty, do you?" I couldn't answer, but Elizabeth spoke for me. "No, Justine, Victor is more convinced of your innocence than I was. Even when he heard you confessed, he did not believe it." I thank him deeply. In these final moments, the kindness of others is a great comfort. It eases my suffering to know my innocence is recognized by you and your cousin. The poor girl tried to console us and herself. She found the peace she sought, but I, the true murderer, felt a relentless guilt that offered no hope. Elizabeth wept, her innocence shining through her sorrow like a cloud passing over the moon, momentarily dimming but never tarnishing its light. Despair consumed me. I bore a hell within that nothing could extinguish. We stayed with Justine for hours, and it was with great difficulty that Elizabeth finally left her. "I wish I could die with you," Elizabeth cried. "I cannot live in this world of misery." Justine forced a smile, repressing her tears. She embraced Elizabeth and said, her voice trembling, "Farewell, sweet lady, dearest Elizabeth, my beloved friend. May heaven bless and protect you. May this be your last misfortune. Live and be happy and make others happy too." The next day, Justine died. Elizabeth's passionate pleas failed to sway the judges, and my own desperate appeals fell on deaf ears. Their cold, unfeeling responses stifled my attempts to confess. Proclaiming my madness wouldn't save Justine. She perished on the scaffold as a murderer. I turned inward, grappling with my guilt, while Elizabeth's silent grief echoed around me. This too was my doing. My father's sorrow and the desolation of our once happy home were the results of my cursed actions. Their tears were not the last. They would mourn again and again. Frankenstein, the son, the friend, the one who would give his life for them, had brought endless suffering. If only fate would be satisfied with this torment and allow peace to come in the grave. These thoughts tormented me as I watched those I loved grieve over William and Justine, the first victims of my unholy experiments. Chapter 9. Nothing tortures the human mind more than the dead calm that follows a whirlwind of events when hope and fear both vanish, leaving a void. Justine was dead. She was at rest, while I remained alive, my veins coursing with blood, yet my heart weighed down by despair and remorse that nothing could lift. Sleep eluded me. I wandered like a damned soul, haunted by the unspeakable horrors I had unleashed and dreading what more might come. Once, my heart had overflowed with kindness and a desire to help humanity. Now all was ruined. Instead of a clear conscience and hopeful future, I was tormented by guilt, driven into a hell of relentless agony. This mental state ravaged my health, which had never fully recovered from the initial shock. I shunned people, and any sound of joy was torture. Solitude became my only refuge, deep, dark, death-like solitude. My father noticed the change in me and tried to help, offering wisdom from his serene conscience and guiltless life. "Victor," he said, his voice trembling with unspoken sorrow, "do you think I don't suffer too? I loved your brother dearly." Tears welled in his eyes. "But we must not let our grief destroy us. We owe it to the living to remain strong, to continue our daily duties. Excessive sorrow cripples us and makes us unfit for society." His advice was sound but useless to me. If not for remorse and terror, I would have hidden my grief and consoled my family. Now I could only look at him with despair and hide myself from his view. Around this time, we moved to our house at Bellerive. This change was welcome, the gates of Geneva closing at 10 every night, making it impossible to stay on the lake, had made the city life unbearable. Now I was free. Often, after everyone else had gone to bed, I took the boat out on the lake. Sometimes I let the wind carry me with the sails set, and sometimes I rowed to the middle of the lake and let the boat drift, lost in my miserable reflections. The serene beauty around me contrasted sharply with my inner turmoil. The croaking frogs and fluttering bats were the only disturbances. Often I was tempted to plunge into the lake's depths, hoping to end my torment forever, but thoughts of Elizabeth, my father, and my surviving brother held me back. I couldn't abandon them to face the monster I had created. I wept bitterly at these times, wishing for peace so I could bring them comfort. But peace was impossible. Remorse had extinguished every hope. I had unleashed an irreversible evil and lived in constant fear of the monster's next atrocity. I sensed that worse was to come, some crime so horrendous it would eclipse all past horrors. As long as I had loved ones, there was room for fear. My hatred for the fiend knew no bounds. When I thought of him, I gnashed my teeth, my eyes burned with rage, and I longed to destroy the life I had recklessly created. My desire for revenge was so intense I would have climbed the highest peak just to hurl him down. I yearned to see him again, to exact my revenge for William and Justine. Our house was a place of mourning. My father's health was shattered by the recent horrors. Elizabeth was despondent, no longer finding joy in her usual activities. She believed that any pleasure was a betrayal of the dead. Eternal grief seemed to her the only fitting tribute to their innocence. She was no longer the happy girl who once wandered with me along the lake, dreaming of our future. The first sorrow had dimmed her bright spirit. "Victor," she said, her voice trembling, "Justine's death has changed my view of the world. I used to think stories of vice and injustice were distant, like tales from another era, but now misery has come home. Men seem like monsters thirsting for blood. Yet I know I'm being unfair. Everyone believed Justine was guilty. If she had committed that crime, she would have been the most depraved creature alive. But she was innocent. I know she was. Your belief in her innocence confirms it for me." When falsehood looks like truth, who can be sure of happiness? I feel like I'm on the edge of a cliff, with thousands pushing me into the abyss. William and Justine were murdered, and the killer walks free, maybe even respected. I wouldn't trade places with such a wretch, even if I had to suffer the same fate. Her words cut through me like a knife. I, not in deed, but in effect, was the true murderer. Elizabeth saw my anguish and took my hand. "My dear friend, you must calm yourself. These events have affected me deeply, but I'm not as wretched as you. There's a look of despair and revenge in your eyes that terrifies me. Victor, banish these dark thoughts. Remember those who love you and pin their hopes on you. Can't we make you happy? While we love each other here in this beautiful land, what can disturb our peace?" Even her words, which I cherished more than any other gift, couldn't chase away the demon in my heart. As she spoke, I drew closer to her, fearing that the monster was lurking nearby, ready to rob me of her too. Not even the tenderness of friendship or the beauty of the world could pull my soul out of its abyss. Love's soft words were powerless against the suffocating cloud of despair that enveloped me. I felt like a wounded deer dragging itself into the darkest corner of the forest, staring helplessly at the arrow that would end it. Sometimes I could wrestle with the dark despair that gripped me. Other times, the raging storm within drove me to seek solace in physical exertion and new surroundings. It was during one of these frenzied moments that I abruptly left home, heading for the Alpine valleys, hoping to lose myself in their grandeur and forget my human sorrows. I aimed for the valley of Chamonix, a place I had visited often as a boy. 6 years had passed since then. I was a wreck, but the timeless, rugged beauty of those mountains remained unchanged. I began my journey on horseback, switching to a mule for the rough, narrow paths. The weather was clear. It was mid-August, nearly 2 months after Justine's death, a date that marked the beginning of my torment. The oppressive weight on my spirit lightened as I plunged deeper into the Arve ravine. The towering mountains, roaring river, and cascading waterfalls spoke of a power so immense it seemed godlike. Here, surrounded by nature's raw force, I felt my fear of anything less almighty begin to fade. As I climbed higher, the valley grew even more magnificent. Ruined castles clung to pine-covered cliffs, the Arve raged impetuously, and cottages peeked from the trees, creating a scene of singular beauty. But the Alps, with their shining white peaks and domes, made it all sublime, as if they belonged to another world. I crossed the Pélissier Bridge, where the river's ravine opened wide, and began to ascend the mountain. Soon I entered the valley of Chamonix. This valley was grander and more awe-inspiring than Servox. through which I had just passed. The high snowy mountains formed its boundaries and immense glaciers edged the road. I heard the thunderous rumble of falling avalanches and saw the plumes of snow they kicked up. Mont Blanc, the supreme and magnificent Mont Blanc, towered above it all, its dome-like summit dominating the valley. During this journey, I occasionally felt a long-lost sense of pleasure. A turn in the road or a familiar sight would remind me of happier, carefree days. The wind whispered soothingly, and nature herself seemed to tell me to weep no more. But these moments were fleeting. Soon I was chained to my grief again, drowning in misery. I spurred my animal forward, trying to escape the world, my fears and myself. In more desperate moments, I would throw myself onto the grass, overwhelmed by horror and despair. Finally, I arrived at Chamonix. Exhaustion followed the extreme physical and mental fatigue I had endured. I stood by the window, watching pale lightning flicker over Mont Blanc and listening to the Arvey's roaring journey below. The rhythmic sounds lulled my overtaxed senses, and when I laid my head on the pillow sleep, that merciful giver of oblivion gently took me. The room was a humble inn, its wooden beams darkened by time, and the air filled with the faint scent of pine and earth. The window offered a view of the imposing mountains, their peaks barely visible in the twilight. The village below was quiet, only the occasional bark of a distant dog or the murmur of the river breaking the silence. As sleep overtook me, I thought of Elizabeth, her face pale and drawn with worry, and my father, his eyes shadowed by grief. The monster I had created was still out there, a dark stain on the world, and I knew my torment was far from over, but for now, at least, I could rest. Chapter 10. I spent the next day wandering through the valley, feeling like a ghost drifting through a world both familiar and alien. The Arveyron's icy waters, born from a glacier creeping down the mountain, flowed beside me. Towering mountains loomed, their abrupt sides like ancient stone sentinels. The glacier's icy wall seemed to hang over me, a frozen giant ready to crush anything in its path. Shattered pines lay scattered around, casualties of time and nature. The solemn silence of this grand cathedral of nature was punctuated only by the roar of cascading water, the thunderous crack of avalanches, and the eerie groans of ice splitting and shifting under its own weight. These magnificent scenes offered a strange solace, lifting me above my personal hell. They didn't erase my grief, but they dulled its sharp edges, diverting my mind from the dark thoughts that had plagued it for weeks. That night, I fell asleep surrounded by the ghosts of the day's grandeur. Snowy peaks, glittering pinnacles, dark pine woods, and rugged ravines filled my dreams. Eagles soared in the clouds, whispering for me to find peace. But where did that peace flee when I awoke the next morning? Melancholy returned with the dawn, wrapping itself around me like a shroud. Rain poured in torrents, and thick mists hid the mountain's summits, veiling my mighty companions. Yet I was determined to pierce through that misty veil and seek them out. What were rain and storm to me? My mule was brought to the door, and I resolved to climb to the summit of Montanvert. I remembered the awe the view of the ever-moving glacier had once inspired in me, lifting my soul from the mundane to the sublime. Nature's raw power had always had a way of solemnizing my mind, making me forget life's passing troubles. I decided to go alone, for the presence of another would shatter the solitary grandeur of the scene. The ascent was steep, with the path winding sharply up the mountain's face. The landscape was terrifically desolate. Winter avalanches had left their mark, with broken trees strewn everywhere. Some lay destroyed, while others hung precariously on the rocks or leaned against their fallen brethren. As I climbed higher, the path crossed snow-filled ravines where stones constantly tumbled from above. One particular spot was especially dangerous. Even a loud voice could trigger an avalanche. The pines here were short and somber, adding a grim severity to the scene. Below, vast mists rose from the rivers, curling around the opposite mountains, their peaks hidden in clouds as rain poured down from the dark sky, amplifying the melancholy mood. Why does humanity boast of its superior sensibilities? It only makes us more vulnerable. If our impulses were limited to hunger, thirst, and desire, we might be almost free. But now, every breeze, every chance word or scene can move us deeply, chaining us to our emotions. I pressed on, each step a struggle against the weight of my thoughts and the relentless pull of gravity. The path's twists and turns seemed endless, each bend revealing more of the harsh, beautiful wilderness. The rain intensified, drumming on my jacket, soaking through to my skin. Yet I pushed forward, driven by a need to escape myself. Finally, I reached a vantage point overlooking the valley. The rain had let up slightly, and I could see patches of the landscape through the mist. The glacier stretched out below me, a frozen river of ice and rock, its surface marred by crevasses and jagged peaks. The sight was both terrifying and mesmerizing, a reminder of nature's indomitable power. As I stood there, drenched and shivering, I felt a flicker of the old awe. The glacier, the mountains, the storm, they were forces far beyond human control, indifferent to our suffering. And yet, there was something profoundly comforting in their existence. They endured, regardless of the fleeting troubles of men. For a moment, I felt a strange kinship with the land, a sense of being part of something vast and eternal. But the moment passed, and the weight of my guilt and grief returned. I turned back, the descent more perilous than the climb. My thoughts were dark, full of remorse and self-loathing. The image of the monster I had created haunted me, a constant reminder of my failures. Back in the village, I retreated to my room, exhausted. I watched the pale lightning play above Mont Blanc and listened to the Arve's relentless rush. The sounds were a lullaby to my tortured soul, and as I lay down, sleep mercifully claimed me. But even in sleep, the shadows lingered, and I knew that my torment was far from over. We rest. A dream has the power to poison sleep. We rise. One wandering thought pollutes the day. We feel, conceive, or reason, laugh or weep, embrace fond woe, or cast our cares away. It is the same, for be it joy or sorrow, the path of its departure still is free. Man's yesterday may ne'er be like his morrow. Naught may endure but mutability. By the time I reached the summit, it was nearly noon. I perched on a rock overlooking the sea of ice, a vast glacier stretching out before me. A thick mist cloaked the scene, but soon a breeze swept it away, revealing the landscape in all its harsh beauty. The glacier's surface was uneven, like a turbulent sea frozen in mid-tide, with deep rifts and crevices that seemed to descend into the earth's bowels. It took nearly 2 hours to cross that treacherous expanse. On the other side, the mountain loomed as a sheer bare rock face. Montanvert stood opposite me, a league away, with Mont Blanc rising behind it in majestic splendor. I found a recess in the rock and stood there, gazing at this stupendous scene. The glacier, like a vast river of ice, wound among mountains whose peaks pierced the sky. The sunlight glittered on their icy surfaces, casting a blinding brilliance. My heart, heavy with sorrow, now swelled with a strange, bittersweet joy. "Wandering spirits," I cried out, "if you indeed roam and do not rest in your graves, grant me this brief happiness or take me away to join you in death." As I spoke, a figure appeared in the distance, advancing with unnatural speed. He leaped over the ice crevices with ease, a giant among men. My vision blurred, and a wave of faintness swept over me, but the cold mountain air quickly revived me. As the figure approached, I recognized him, my creation, the wretched being I had brought to life. Rage and horror gripped me. I resolved to confront him, to end this nightmare with my own hands. His face was a mask of anguish and disdain, its grotesque features almost unbearable to look at. But I hardly noticed, blinded by fury. "Devil!" I shouted. "Do you dare approach me? Do you not fear the vengeance I will unleash upon you? Begone, vile insect! Or stay, so I can crush you and erase the horror you have wrought." "I expected this," the creature said, his voice a low growl. "All men hate the wretched. How much more must I be hated, who am more miserable than any living thing? Yet you, my creator, detest and spurn me. You seek to kill me. How dare you toy with life? Do your duty to me, and I will do mine to you and mankind. Comply with my conditions, and I will leave you in peace. Refuse, and I will glut the maw of death with the blood of your remaining friends." "Abhorred monster! Fiend! Hell's torments are too mild for you. You reproach me with your creation? Come, let me end the life I so recklessly bestowed." Consumed by rage, I lunged at him, driven by every dark emotion one being could feel against another. He dodged me easily. "Be calm, listen before you vent your hatred. Have I not suffered enough? Life, even one of anguish, is dear to me, and I will defend it. Remember, you made me stronger than you. My height, my strength surpass yours, but I will not oppose you. I am your creature. I will be mild and docile if you fulfill your duty to me. Frankenstein, be just to me as you are to others. I should be your Adam, but you treat me like a fallen angel. Everywhere I see joy from which I am irrevocably excluded. I was benevolent. Misery made me a fiend. Make me happy, and I will be virtuous again." His words cut through my fury. Here was the being I had fashioned, pleading for compassion. The creature's eyes, filled with a blend of suffering and hope, met mine. For a moment, the glacier, the mountains, the world around us faded. It was just us, creator and creation, bound by a shared fate that was as immutable as the icy peaks surrounding us. The creature's plea for happiness, his promise of virtue in return, echoed in my mind. Could I truly grant him this, or was it a cruel illusion? The wind howled through the chasms, carrying with it the weight of my past scenes and the uncertain future. "Begone! I will not hear you. There can be no peace between us. We are enemies. Leave, or let's settle this once and for all in a fight where one of us must fall." How can I move you? Will no plea soften your heart towards your own creation who begs for your compassion? Believe me, Frankenstein, I was once filled with love and humanity, but now I am miserably alone. You, my creator, loathe me. What hope can I find among your fellow humans who owe me nothing? They despise and reject me. The desolate mountains and icy caves are my refuge. I've roamed these frozen wastes for days. These caves of ice, which I alone do not fear, are my home. These bleak skies are kinder to me than any human. If mankind knew of my existence, they would hunt me just as you do. Should I not then hate those who detest me? I will show no mercy to my enemies. I am miserable, and I will make them share my wretchedness. Yet you have the power to end my suffering and save countless others from a rage that could consume them all. Show me compassion. Listen to my tale. Afterward, judge me as you see fit. Even the guilty are allowed to defend themselves before their execution. Listen to me, Frankenstein. You accuse me of murder, yet you would destroy your own creation without a second thought. Oh, the eternal justice of man, I don't ask for your mercy, just listen to me. Then, if you still wish, destroy the work of your hands." "Why do you remind me," I responded, "of events that make me shudder with guilt? I am the wretched origin and author of your misery. Cursed be the day you first saw light. Cursed be the hands that formed you. You have made me wretched beyond words. I can't even consider if I'm just to you or not. Begone! Relieve me from the sight of your detested form." "Thus I relieve thee, my creator," he said, placing his hated hands before my eyes, which I violently pushed away. "Still, you can listen to me and grant me your compassion. By the virtues I once possessed, I demand this from you. Hear my tale. It is long and strange, and this place is not suited for your delicate senses. Come to the hut on the mountain. The sun is still high. Before it sets behind those snowy cliffs and lights another world, you will have heard my story and can decide. It is up to you whether I leave humanity forever and live a wretched life or become a scourge to your fellow creatures and the author of your ruin." As he said this, he led the way across the ice and I followed. My heart was heavy and I did not answer him. As I walked, I considered his arguments and decided to listen to his tale. Curiosity and a sense of responsibility compelled me. I needed to know if he was truly the murderer of my brother. For the first time, I realized my duty as a creator. I should try to make him happy before condemning him. These thoughts urged me to comply. We crossed the ice and ascended the opposite rock. The air was cold and rain began to fall again. We entered the hut, the fiend exultant, while I was weighed down with despair. But I agreed to listen. Sitting by the fire my loathsome companion had lit, he began his tale. The hut was a rickety structure, barely more than a few wooden planks nailed together and leaning against the mountainside. Inside, it was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and old ashes. A small fire crackled in the corner, casting flickering shadows on the rough-hewn walls. The creature's eyes glowed in the dim light, a mix of pain and defiance. As he began to speak, I couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. Here, in this desolate place, amidst the howling wind and relentless rain, I would finally hear the tale of my creation. The hut's oppressive atmosphere seemed to close in around us, the fire's warmth a stark contrast to the chill of the icy wind outside. His voice was rough, yet oddly compelling, drawing me into the dark narrative of his existence. Each word was a reminder of my own guilt and the twisted consequences of my ambition. As he spoke, I felt the weight of my responsibility pressing down on me, a burden I could not escape. The creature's tale was a haunting blend of ordinary events and supernatural horror, each detail more chilling than the last. As he recounted his experiences, I felt a growing sense of unease. His story was not just a recounting of past events, but a reflection of the monstrous reality I had unleashed. The lines between creator and creation blurred, and I realized that his fate was inextricably linked to mine. Outside, the storm raged on, a fitting backdrop to the horrors being unveiled within the hut. The creature's words echoed in my mind, each sentence a stark reminder of the dark forces at play. As the tale unfolded, I found myself drawn deeper into the twisted web of our shared destiny, unable to turn away from the horror that lay before me. In that moment, surrounded by the remnants of my own hubris and the living testament to my greatest sin, I understood the true depth of my responsibility. The creature's fate was my own, and the path forward was shrouded in darkness. As the fire crackled and the wind howled outside, I braced myself for the revelations to come, knowing that the decisions made here would shape the future in ways I could scarcely imagine. Chapter 11. I lay on my makeshift bed of straw, unable to sleep, my mind racing through the events of the day. What struck me most was the gentle demeanor of these people, and I longed to join them, yet I dared not. The memory of the brutal treatment I had suffered from the villagers the night before was too fresh. I resolved to stay hidden in my hovel, watching and trying to understand what drove their actions. The next morning, the cottagers were up before dawn. The young woman, whom I later learned was named Agatha, busied herself with tidying the cottage and preparing breakfast, while the young man, Felix, left after the meal. The day unfolded in a predictable rhythm. Felix worked tirelessly outside, and Agatha managed the various chores within the cottage. The old man, blind and frail, spent his time either playing a worn-out instrument or lost in thought. The love and respect the younger cottagers showed him were palpable. They cared for him with a tenderness that made him smile benevolently. Yet, despite their affection for each other, they were not entirely happy. Felix and Agatha often retreated to cry in private. It puzzled and pained me to see such lovely creatures so miserable. They had a delightful home, a warm fire, good food, and fine clothes. More importantly, they had each other. Why then were they unhappy? Their tears haunted me, and I was determined to understand. It took a while, but eventually I discovered one reason for their sorrow: poverty. They lived off the vegetables from their garden and the milk from their lone cow, which barely produced enough during the harsh winter. Often, Felix and Agatha would go hungry, giving their portions to the old man. This selflessness moved me deeply. I had been stealing their food at night for my own survival, but realizing the pain I caused, I stopped and began subsisting on berries, nuts, and roots from the nearby woods. I found another way to help them. Felix spent much of his time gathering wood for the fire. At night, I began using his tools to collect and stockpile wood for them. The first time Agatha found the pile of wood, she was astonished and called Felix, who shared her surprise. That day, instead of venturing into the forest, Felix repaired the cottage and tended the garden. Gradually, I made a more profound discovery. These people had a way of communicating their thoughts and feelings through articulate sounds, speech. The words they spoke brought smiles or tears, joy or sorrow. It was a godlike skill, and I yearned to learn it. But their quick speech and unfamiliar words baffled me. Still, I was determined. Over time, I learned a few words: fire, milk, bread, and wood. I also learned their names: Agatha, Felix, and the old man they called father. Winter passed this way. The gentle manners and beauty of the cottagers endeared them to me. When they were sad, I felt their sorrow. When they were happy, I shared in their joy. I rarely saw anyone else, and those I did encounter only made me appreciate the cottagers more. The old man often tried to cheer his children, speaking in a kind tone that even uplifted me. Agatha listened with respect, her eyes sometimes filling with tears, which she tried to hide. Felix, however, was always the saddest, appearing to have suffered more deeply than the others. Yet, despite his sorrowful face, his voice was often more cheerful, especially when he spoke to his father. As winter thawed into spring, I watched and learned, my heart swelling with a mixture of longing and despair. I was an outsider, a monstrous shadow lurking in the periphery of their lives, but I couldn't help but feel connected to them. They were my first glimpse of humanity's better nature, and I clung to that hope, desperate to find a place in the world that had created me and yet seemed to have no space for me. I could recount countless small moments that revealed the nature of these kind-hearted cottagers. Despite their poverty, Felix always found a joy in the little things. I remember him presenting his sister Agatha with the first white flower that peeked through the snow, his face lighting up with the purest pleasure. Before she woke each morning, he would clear the snow blocking her path to the milk house, draw water from the well, and haul wood from the outhouse. To his perpetual amazement, his wood pile was always mysteriously replenished overnight. During the day, Felix often worked for a neighboring farmer, returning empty-handed but with a lighter step, sometimes losing himself in the garden work or reading to his blind father and sister when the cold kept them indoors. This reading puzzled me at first, but I gradually realized that the sounds Felix made while reading matched those he used in conversation. I surmised he was decoding symbols on the paper into speech, a process that fascinated me. I longed to understand this godlike science, but struggled with the swift, disconnected sounds. Over time, I learned the basic words: fire, milk, bread, and wood. I also discovered their names: Agatha, Felix, and the old man, simply called Father. Each word I mastered felt like a triumph, opening a window to their world. I admired the cottagers' perfect forms, their grace and delicate features, but when I caught my reflection in a clear pool, I recoiled in horror. Initially, I couldn't believe the monstrous visage was mine. Once reality settled in, I was overcome with despondence. My deformity felt like a curse, alienating me from the humanity I longed to join. As spring arrived, the snow melted, revealing bare trees and black earth. Felix became busier and the signs of impending famine vanished. Their food was simple but sufficient, and new plants sprouted in the garden, bringing a sense of renewal. The old man, leaning on Felix, walked outside daily when it wasn't raining. The high winds quickly dried the earth after each downpour, making the season increasingly pleasant. My life in the hovel followed a routine. Mornings were spent observing the cottagers. When they went about their tasks, I slept. At night, if the moon or stars provided light, I foraged in the woods for my food and fuel for the cottage. I often cleared their paths of snow and performed the tasks I had seen Felix do. These acts, performed by an unseen hand, bewildered them. Once I overheard them referring to a good spirit and wonderful. Though I didn't understand the words then, my thoughts grew more active and I yearned to uncover the reasons behind Felix's misery and Agatha's sadness. I foolishly believed I could bring happiness to these deserving people. In my dreams, the blind father, gentle Agatha, and noble Felix appeared as superior beings, arbiters of my fate. I fantasized about revealing myself to them, imagining their initial disgust turning to affection through my gentle demeanor and kind words. These hopes spurred me to learn their language with renewed vigor. My voice was rough and harsh, but I managed to pronounce words with some clarity. Like an earnest, well-meaning donkey striving to earn a place among beloved pets, I believed my intentions could eventually win their favor. With the arrival of spring, the earth transformed. Men emerged from their winter seclusion to engage in cultivation, birds sang cheerfully, and trees began to bud. The once bleak, damp landscape now seemed fit for gods. Enchanted by nature's renewal, I felt my spirits lift. The past was forgotten, the present was serene, and the future sparkled with hope and joy.
This is the end of part 1 of Frankenstein, reimagined in the style of best-selling author Stephen King. If you are enjoying this audiobook, please take a moment to like and subscribe. If you have any ideas, comments, or suggestions about this audiobook, or if you have an idea of a classic book you would like to hear reimagined in the style of a modern author, let us know in the comments. Join us for the conclusion of Frankenstein Reimagined in Part 2 on the Classic Books Reimagined channel